grizzly bear. Now, the bear was quite a ways away. But if you know something about grizzly bears, first of all, they don't have the best eyesight. So, for a fraction of a second, we weren't thinking is that, oh, he can't see us. But then, since we're all biology majors, we took a second and realized that didn't matter, because what is the great sense that a grizzly has? Does anybody know? Smell. They have the best nose. They can smell for hundreds of yards. And he was probably, I'd say at least a couple hundred yards away. But then that head went up, looked right at us, and he began to charge. So what did we do? We got into the car and took off. Now, some would say, well, you were afraid. But that was a healthy fear. Now, we'll go back to the regular slides. So I want you to keep that image. There's some things to have healthy fear about. And then, there are other things that are unhealthy fears. So, remember, grizzly bear, be afraid. So the next time you're at Yellowstone or Glacier, I don't want to hear about any of you walking up to a grizzly. And certainly don't do like my father did many, many years ago, long before he passed away. In the old days when he used to feed them out of the garbage dumps, and my father fed a grizzly bear by hand. I'm very fortunate to be here today. My father was just a child. Unfortunately, he did not have a healthy fear. You see, there are healthy fears. You should be afraid of grizzlies for a good reason. Being a pastor in Montana and then being a pastor in Colorado, there's also a healthy fear of forest fires. And even some of the smoke jumpers, the firefighters that I knew that would go, as we saw the billowing smoke coming across, we could see it right from our house into the mountains as we looked out from our back door. These brave men and women would go fight the fires, but they had a healthy fear of the fire. Because in an instant, that fire line could shift on them as they were fighting. And even with the protective gear that they had along, and even with the sheet that they would pull over them to protect them, it would not be enough. And sadly, there were times when we lost some of those brave men and women. But all of them had a healthy fear of the fire. That's different than having a fear of the pastor asking you to be part of the sermon. That's an unhealthy fear. Don't be worried, we're not going to do that to you. Not this time. But even if I did, you should not be afraid. Why? Because I would simply pull you in to ask you to participate in the word of the Lord. Some people are afraid of the word of the Lord. That's an unhealthy fear. We should embrace it. But sometimes it scares us because, well, we're Lutheran. And Lutherans, truth be told, are a little bit afraid of sharing the word. It's okay here, or if you're watching on TV, it's very safe, or if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, or however you're watching us, there's a certain comfort. But to go out and to share the word, that can be very frightening for many of us. That's an unhealthy fear. And in the readings today, we can distinguish between healthy and unhealthy fear. The last few Sundays, as I mentioned, you've been hearing this story about Jacob, and now we get to Joseph. And that's why before we began worship service, I played a little bit of the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. I know in the Hebrew translation we have today, it says long sleeves. The other way to translate in Hebrew, of course, you could say multicolored. But Joseph, I believe, had a very healthy fear when his brothers grabbed him. First of all, were threatening to kill him. Now, who among you would feel safe if 11 of your brothers grabbed you and said, let's kill him? Anybody think, oh, I would be fearless, 11 against 1, I could beat those odds? Well, I don't don't care how good you are at martial arts, 11 people to 1, those are not good odds. I imagine Joseph was very afraid, and that was a healthy fear. Then they threw him in a pit. I'm sure he was still afraid, because they could have left him there to die. And even when they ended up taking him out and selling him, I'm sure he was still afraid. Any of us would have real fear being sold into slavery. It's a real live fear in this day and age, because as I speak, there are humans that are in slavery to this day. They're even trafficked through the U.S. and even through Minneapolis, which is one of the major hubs. That is a healthy fear to have, the fear of being enslaved. We should not be fearful, though, as people of God, not only speak out against it, but to work against it. To be afraid to say anything, or to do anything, or to simply feel, because it is a bit of fear, that, well, there's nothing I can do about it, that would be an unhealthy fear. And to this day, that's why we strive to do things like having fair trade coffee. Why we try as much as we can to find fair trade chocolate and things like that. Why? Because if it's not, there's sadly a very good chance that the people that have picked those beans, that have gone out in the fields, are slaves. And many of them, like Joseph, really mere children. Healthy and unhealthy fears. It is an unhealthy fear not to do anything about that. Not as a social justice, but as people of God. It was a healthy fear for Joseph to fear slavery. Just like it's a healthy fear to be afraid of those grizzly bears. I mean, that's a healthy fear to keep your distance and say, good bear, nice bear, but don't run. It's a healthy fear to fear a prairie fire or a forest fire, because we would be foolish not to take note how dangerous that can be. Who among us would want to put their hand on the burner of a hot stove? What good parent would ever take their child and put their hand on there to teach them how to fear? It's good enough to be in the mindset of healthy fear to know you don't put your hand on there. But as little kids, we don't often know the difference. As children of God, sometimes we don't seem to know the difference between the healthy and the unhealthy fear. It tends to creep into our lives in very subtle ways. How on earth will I possibly, and now fill in the blanks, how on earth will I possibly be able to go on in life? I have a mortgage, I have car payments, I have all these other things. There's no hope. It's all consuming. We have that song in our songbook, have no fear, little flock. Well, how can we say that? Pastor, you don't know what I'm going through. You don't know what I faced. Let me tell you my story about this and that I've had to deal with, that have gripped me in fear. Economic fear, personal fear that I'll be alienated from family or friends. I have no words for you except the word of the Lord. Despite what happened to Joseph, a horrendous thing to have happen to anyone, we hear in the story, as it will go further through next week, that God never, the Lord never, ever abandoned Joseph. No matter what we encounter, the Lord will never, God will never, never abandon you. Even if all others forsake you, as the disciples did to Jesus, the Lord will never abandon you. It's an unhealthy fear to be afraid that the Lord will ever turn against you or that you'll be abandoned. That won't happen, no matter what you do. If you don't believe me, believe the gospel story today. Peter, and remember, Jesus ends up calling him the rock of the church. I mean, the person upon which he's going to found the Christian faith. Peter, at first, like perhaps many of us, is very believing when he sees Jesus and he's ready to go out on the water. Now, this is right after everybody was afraid that what they saw was a ghost. So keep that in mind. Now, is there anybody out there that are afraid of ghosts? Well, if you are, I'm here to say have no fear. Because if the Lord is with you, there's really no fear in that. You don't have to be afraid of the dark. You don't have to be afraid of ghosts. I guess you could join in the song that I ain't afraid of no ghosts. But you find that there are so few healthy fears on your plate that the rest of your plate, you can wipe out all those unhealthy fears. And just have a few of those, like the grizzly bears, the fires, and so on. You can wipe out those unhealthy fears because the Lord is with you, no matter what. And so here's Peter, so quickly after they realize it is Jesus, and Jesus is with them. Jesus is with them, Emmanuel, God with us. He gets up and starts walking on the water because he wants to walk as Jesus walked. He wants to walk as a disciple of Christ, which is, I would say, what we all want to do. Or at least I hope we do. And then what happens? Peter looks around him. Now in this story, it's a storm. They're on Lake Galilee. I know it's called a sea, but I gotta tell you, once you've been there and I looked around, I realized this is just a lake. You're from Minnesota after all. Lake Superior is a sea compared to Lake Galilee. So Lake Galilee, but it can still get pretty rough out there. So storm comes up. He has faith in Jesus. And yet he begins to look around. Kind of like us. You know, when we begin to look around at our own personal circumstances in life, it's easy for those fears to creep in. I know it's easy for the church, not just as individuals, but as a faith family. Look around you. Take a look. Look around. Turn those heads. Don't just look at me now. You can't see it out there, but they're not looking there. Now we go. This is a beautiful building. If people had lived in fear, first building would never have been built after those two congregations from the 1800s came together, finally. Nor would that second portion have been built if we lived out of fear. We would not have, to this day, Sunday school, vacation Bible school, confirmation, musicians. Well, we certainly wouldn't have all this fancy technological stuff. We wouldn't have all of that if we only lived in fears, thinking, where will the support come from? How will we possibly continue with God's ministry here if we were to only live out of fear? That's an unhealthy fear. If we're people of God, we have to believe that God is with us. That somehow God will provide not necessarily what we want as individuals or as a faith family or as the Lutheran Church and the Christian body throughout the world, but that God will provide what we need. What we need to do to continue with our gospel ministry, to actually share this word of hope. Because in these stories today and in the psalm, you should have heard that word of hope. Because as Peter begins to sink, does anybody remember, what did he do? Did he just start saying, well, I'm going to sink, here we go, there's no hope for me? Or did he cry out to Jesus? Did he cry out to the Lord? And what did the Lord do? Immediately. And the Greek word, by the way, is very intense that way. It gives the sense of immediacy. Immediately, Jesus reaches out. Anytime you and I cry out to the Lord, immediately Jesus reaches out to us. We are never abandoned. We are never forsaken. It would be an unhealthy fear to fear that Jesus will never be there for us, or at some particular moment couldn't possibly be there for us as an individual, as a faith family, as the body of Christ. The gospel is clear. Don't be afraid. Have no fear, little flock. Believe. Cry out. Jesus will reach out in turn. So as you go about your week, remember this. If you encounter a grizzly bear, please have a good, healthy fear. A good respect, that is. Don't go try to hug it. Even if there's a trainer nearby, I would still suggest just keep a good, respectful distance. If you encounter a forest or a prairie fire, please do not go out by yourself and try to put it out all on your own. Have a healthy fear, have a healthy respect for that. But when you encounter others, do not have the unhealthy fear to shy away from sharing this word of hope. Please know in your heart that that word of hope is for you and for everyone else. Please share it freely. And in those times, when fear begins to creep in, like maybe when you were a little kid and you were afraid of the dark, or of ghosts, or whatever was hiding in the closet underneath your bed, at those times, don't be afraid to speak up, to cry out to Jesus. I promise you, Jesus will reach out to you. That's the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our song